Hi, this is my rat dissection. So the respiratory system of a rat begins with the mouth, goes into the pharynx and then the larynx through the trachea and branches off into bronchi and then into bronchioles into the lungs and then finally into these little sacs called alveoli where gas exchange occurs. And the circulatory system, as you can see, it has a four-chambered heart and a right and left lung. That means that it's double circuited, so there's a separation of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. And it has systemic circulation throughout the body that provides oxygen to the body, and then pulmonary circulation that oxygenates the blood as it goes to the lungs. And then in the digestive system, in the dissection, you can see that the path begins with the mouth and then it enters the pharynx and through the esophagus until it reaches the stomach, and that's where mechanical and chemical digestion occurs, but that also occurs in the mouth. Then in the small intestine, the pancreas, gallbladder, and liver secrete chemicals to further break down food, and that's where most food is absorbed, or most nutrients are absorbed. And then finally, it enters the cecum and passes through the large intestine so that the large intestine can absorb the water. And then any undigested material is going to pass through the rectum and digested via the anus. I compared the rabbit to the rat because they are both in the phylum Chordata and they're both mammals. So the respiratory system is going to include a mouth, larynx, trachea, bronchi, bronchioles, lungs, and also the alveoli, which are unique to mammals. And then the digestive system of a rabbit is going to look like generally a mammal's. It's going to begin with a mouth and then through an esophagus to the stomach. That's where mechanical and chemical digestion is going to occur. And then it's going to have that small intestine that chemically breaks down most of the food and absorbs the nutrients. And then the large intestine will be present and will absorb the water, and it will have a rectum and anus that helps to ingest the food. And the reproductive system of a rabbit is going to be dioecious because they are mammals. That means they're separate sexes. The males are going to have testes surrounded by a scrotum where the sperm production occurs, and then females have ovaries that produce eggs, and they both internally gestate. So the rabbit's going to internally gestate. The embryo is going to grow inside the uterus, and that's where that's where the embryo is going to grow. And then here are the pictures of the four animals: the earthworm, crayfish, squid, and perch digestive systems. So they're all going to have a complete digestive tract. They all have mechanical and chemical digestion, all have an esophagus and an intestine where nutrients are absorbed. The earthworm, as you can see on the left, is going to be simple. It has that crop that stores the food and a gizzard that grinds the food. The crayfish have that gastric mill inside the cardiac stomach where mechanical digestion occurs, as well as the mouth. But then after that, it's going to go into the pyloric stomach below, where a lot of the chemical digestion is going to occur. The squid have a specialized mouth with a beak and a radula that tears flesh and crunches bone. And then they are going to have a stomach that mechanically and chemically digests food as well. The perch is the most specialized digestive system and has a mouth and a stomach that chemically and mechanically break down food. And then many of the specialized digestive glands help to break down the nutrients that are in their diet as well in the small intestine. And then the circulatory system, as you can see, they're all going to have a heart to pump blood, and they all have vessels for circulation. And all of their systems transport oxygen and nutrients and expel waste products. The differences are how they're specialized. So in a crayfish on the far right, you can see that it just has a single heart and it has ostia in it that take in hemolymph and pump the blood through open vessels because crayfish have an open circulatory system. The squid are going to have three hearts. As you can see, it has two brachial hearts and one systemic heart in the middle. The systemic heart pumps the blood to the body and the brachial pumps to the gills. The earthworm doesn't have a heart. It has five simple aortic arches, so it's going to have the simplest circulatory system. And then crayfish and perch have one heart, as you can see in the pictures. And the perch has a specialized heart that has an atrium and a ventricle, so it's two-chambered. And those are going to pump deoxygenated blood to the gills. And the respiratory system are pictured here in the four animals, and they all use diffusion for gas exchange across the surface, and then those surfaces are always moist. They differ in where diffusion occurs. So in the earthworm, you can see that it's a very small animal, so diffusion is going to occur in the skin, and it's kept moist by mucus. The gills in the crayfish, squid, and perch, as you can see, are all kept moist by water because they're aquatic animals. The crayfish have gills under their carapace. The squid have the gills inside the mantle cavity. And they also have the siphon, which you can see on top, that controls the intake and outtake of water. And the perch have gills in the opercular chamber, and they use their mouths to intake more water if needed so that more water passes over the gills. And then the reproductive systems. So they're pictured here. On the earthworm, it's going to have two sets of organs, the female and male, and so that means they're hermaphroditic. And this is advantageous because in an environment where finding a mate might be scarce, they're able to self-fertilize, and that requires little energy, and they lay, around 10 eggs, and so that increases survivability because they don't stick around to protect those eggs. And then in a crayfish, they're going to be dioecious, so they're going to have males that transfer sperm to females, and this increases genetic diversity. And they usually lay roughly 100 eggs, which increases survivability. And that's important because there's a lot of predators in an aquatic environment. And then external fertilization requires little energy because they don't need to stick around to protect the eggs. And then in the squid, they're going to be dioecious as well. Males transfer sperm to females, and when the female lays them, she uses the packets of sperm and fertilizes the eggs as she lays them. So it's external fertilization, so that requires little energy. And then the separate sexes increases genetic diversity for better adaptation. And they lay hundreds to thousands of eggs, which increases survivability, especially in an aquatic environment with predators. And then in a perch, they are dioecious as well. They have paired testes. Females have one ovary. This increases genetic diversity, and males release sperm onto the female's eggs, so that requires little energy because it's externally fertilized. And they release thousands of eggs, which significantly increases survivability, especially in an aquatic environment. And then in the rat's dioecious as well. So males are going to have a scrotum that encases testes, which produce sperm. And then the females, which I have in the dissection here, has ovaries that produce eggs. And then fertilized eggs, which happens internally. It's internal fertilization. The embryos grow in the uterus. And so there's a greater energy requirement since the rats need to carry around their offspring, and they also need to find a mate to internally fertilize. But it also increases survivability due to the fact that they are able to protect their young and have multiple embryos growing at the same time. And then a perch's physiology wouldn't work in a rat because they have two different diets. So in the digestive system, the perch's is much shorter because it's usually only breaking down proteins, and then the rats need plant material and other nutrients like carbs and fibers that the perch system wouldn't be able to digest, so the rat would die. And then in the circulatory system, perch have a two-chambered heart and a single-circuited system, which is inefficient compared to a rat's double-circuited four-chambered heart system. So the rats wouldn't be able to transport as much oxygen because it doesn't have that separate pulmonary circulation. And in the respiratory system, definitely would not work in a rat because gills would dry out on land, so it wouldn't have that moist surface to perform gas exchange. And then the nervous system is much simpler in a perch because it has less of a complex anatomy, and perch don't have specialized behaviors. Rats have a larger brain, so the perch brain would be too small. And rats need to regulate their own body temperature, so the nervous system does this. If they had a perch nervous system, that's specialized for a cold-blooded animal, so rats wouldn't actually be able to regulate their body temperature if they had the nervous system of a perch, so they would die. And that is my presentation. Thank you.